Griffith represents perhaps the most devastating example of sacrificing humanity for power in all of anime. Originally the charismatic leader of the Band of the Hawk, Griffith was driven by an impossible dream of having his own kingdom. When his body was broken, and his dream seemed shattered after a year of torture, he was presented with a choice that would define him forever. During the eclipse, Griffith used the Crimson Behelit to transform into Femto, the fifth member of the God Hand. This transformation required him to sacrifice his closest companions, the very people who had followed him loyally for years. The ritual wasn't just about gaining power, it was about fundamentally changing what he was. Griffith had to abandon every human emotion, every connection, every trace of the man he once was. As Femto, Griffith gained reality warping abilities, near omnipotence within certain realms, and effective immortality. But the cost was absolute. He became incapable of genuine human emotion, viewing his former friends as mere pawns. The most horrifying aspect is that this wasn't a gradual corruption, it was a conscious choice. Griffith willingly chose power over his humanity, knowing exactly what he was giving up. What makes Griffith's sacrifice particularly tragic is that he was already exceptional as a human. His strategic brilliance, charisma, and swordsmanship had already elevated him far above ordinary people, but his ambition demanded more than human limitations could provide, leading him to abandon his humanity entirely for the sake of his dream. Sasuke Eizen's transformation represents a more gradual but equally complete abandonment of humanity. Initially appearing as a kind, scholarly captain in the Soul Society, Eizen had been orchestrating events for over a century, treating everyone around him as experimental subjects rather than individuals. Aizen's pursuit of power led him to experiment with the Hogyoku, a device capable of breaking down the barriers between Soul Reapers and Hollows. Through these experiments, he transcended the normal limitations of both species, gaining abilities that placed him far beyond typical Soul Reapers. His power grew to such an extent that he could crush opponents with his spiritual pressure alone. But Aizen's true sacrifice of humanity wasn't physical, it was psychological and emotional. He systematically removed himself from all human connections, viewing other beings as inherently inferior. His relationships were purely manipulative, designed to further his goals rather than provide genuine connection. Even his own subordinates were treated as disposable tools. The most chilling aspect of Aizen's transformation is his complete lack of empathy. He orchestrated the deaths of countless individuals, manipulated his closest allies, and destroyed entire communities, all while maintaining perfect emotional detachment. His pursuit of godhood required him to abandon not just human limitations, but human compassion entirely. By the end of his arc, Eizen had become something beyond human comprehension, a being of immense power, but completely divorced from the human experience that once defined him. Madara Uchiha's sacrifice of humanity began with noble intentions, but led to one of the most complete transformations in anime. Originally fighting to protect his clan and create peace, Madara became obsessed with implementing the infinite Tsukuyomi, a plan that would trap all of humanity in an eternal dream. Madara's transformation involved multiple stages of abandoning his humanity. First, he faked his death and lived in isolation for decades, cutting himself off from all human connections. During this time, he cultivated Hashirama's cells, fundamentally altering his biology and extending his lifespan far beyond human limits. His resurrection through the Edo Tensei marked another step away from humanity. He was no longer truly alive, but something between life and death. When he was fully revived, Madara systematically absorbed more power, culminating in becoming the Ten-Tails Jinchuriki. This transformation granted him godlike abilities but required him to merge with a primordial force of destruction. The most significant aspect of Madara's sacrifice was philosophical. He abandoned the concept that humans could coexist peacefully through understanding and growth. Instead, he chose to impose his will on all of humanity, believing that forced peace through illusion was preferable to the struggles of real human existence. Madara's final form was barely recognizable, as human covered in truth-seeking orbs, wielding reality-altering powers, and completely disconnected from human empathy. He became convinced that his way was the only path to peace, justifying any atrocity in service of his ultimate goal. His transformation shows how even noble intentions can lead to the complete abandonment of humanity when one becomes convinced that they alone know what's best for everyone else. Johann Liebert represents perhaps the most disturbing example of sacrificing humanity for power, because his transformation appears to have occurred in childhood. Unlike others on this list who gained supernatural abilities, Johann's power lies in his complete mastery of human psychology and his absolute lack of human empathy. Johann's sacrifice of humanity seems to have been the result of horrific experiments and trauma during his childhood in East Germany. These experiences stripped away his capacity for normal human emotion, leaving behind something that appears human but operates according to completely different principles. What makes Johann terrifying is that he retained his intelligence and charisma while completely abandoning human compassion. He gained the ability to manipulate others with supernatural precision, understanding exactly how to break people's minds and turn them into extensions of his will. His power lies not in physical strength, but in his complete understanding of human weakness combined with his total lack of restraint. Johann doesn't just kill people, he destroys their humanity first. He turns parents against children, creates monsters out of ordinary people, and orchestrates elaborate scenarios designed to maximize psychological damage. His goal isn't simply destruction, but the systematic removal of human hope and compassion from the world. The most chilling aspect of Johann's character is that he appears to view himself as performing a necessary function, removing the disease of human emotion and connection from the world. He sees humanity's capacity for love and hope as weaknesses to be eliminated, making him perhaps the most complete rejection of human values in anime. His transformation is complete. There's no trace of normal human emotion or connection left in him, only a perfect predator designed to exploit and destroy human nature. Shio Tucker's sacrifice of humanity is perhaps the most immediately horrifying because it involves his willingness to destroy the people closest to him. Known as the sowing life alchemist, Tucker was obsessed with creating chimeras that could speak human language, a quest that led him to commit unforgivable acts. Tucker's first major sacrifice of humanity occurred years before the main story, when he used his wife in a chimera experiment to maintain his state alchemist certification. This act required him to completely abandon his role as a husband and his basic human empathy. The fact that he could sacrifice someone who loved and trusted him shows how thoroughly he had prioritized his research over human connections. His most infamous act was transforming his daughter Nina and her dog Alexander into a chimera. This wasn't done out of necessity or under threat. It was a calculated decision to preserve his position and continue his research. Tucker had to actively suppress any paternal instincts and view his own child as experimental material rather than a person deserving protection. What makes Tucker's transformation particularly disturbing is that he retained his human appearance and manner of speaking while completely abandoning human morality. He could discuss his experiments casually, even seeming confused by others' horror at his actions. This suggests a complete disconnect from normal human emotional responses. Tucker's pursuit of alchemical knowledge required him to view living beings as components rather than individuals with inherent worth. His willingness to sacrifice his family shows that he had abandoned not just general human empathy, but even the most basic human bonds. The power Tucker gained, the ability to create speaking chimeras, came at the cost of everything that makes someone human: compassion, protective instincts, and the capacity to value others' well-being over personal ambition. Light Yagami's transformation from idealistic student to godlike killer represents one of anime's most detailed explorations of gradually sacrificing humanity for power. His descent began with noble intentions, using the Death Note to create a world free of crime, but evolved into something far more sinister. Light's sacrifice of humanity was gradual but systematic. Initially, he experienced guilt and hesitation when using the Death Note, showing that his human conscience was still intact. However, as he became intoxicated with his power to decide life and death, he began viewing himself as fundamentally different from ordinary humans. The power Light gained wasn't just the ability to kill with a name and face, it was the psychological authority that came with deciding who deserved to live or die. This power corrupted his thinking, leading him to view himself as a god whose judgment was inherently superior to human law or morality. Light's sacrifice of humanity became complete when he began killing innocent people who posed threats to his mission. This included law enforcement officers, FBI agents, and eventually even his own family members. Each murder required him to suppress more of his human empathy and connection to others. By the end of the series, Light had become incapable of viewing other people as anything more than obstacles or tools. His relationships were purely manipulative, his emotions carefully calculated for effect, and his sense of morality completely replaced by his vision of justice. The most tragic aspect of Light's transformation is that it was entirely self-inflicted. Unlike others who were forced into their circumstances, Light chose each step of his descent, gradually convincing himself that his abandonment of humanity was necessary for the greater good. While Griffith chose to sacrifice his humanity, Guts had his humanity torn away by circumstance and trauma, leading to a different but equally significant transformation. After surviving the eclipse and witnessing the sacrifice of his comrades, Guts became the Black Swordsman, a being being driven almost entirely by rage and the need for revenge. Guts' sacrifice of humanity wasn't voluntary like others on this list, but it was still a conscious choice to embrace his darker nature. The trauma of the eclipse could have broken him completely, but instead, he chose to become something capable of fighting the inhuman forces that had destroyed his life. The power Guts gained came from his willingness to abandon normal human limitations and moral restraints. He became capable of fighting demons and apostles through sheer brutality and determination, often sustaining injuries that would kill ordinary people. His pain tolerance, combat instincts, and capacity for violence all transcended normal human boundaries. Guts' transformation involved abandoning his capacity for trust and emotional vulnerability. For years after the eclipse, he was incapable of forming meaningful relationships, viewing everyone as either enemies or potential casualties. His humanity became buried under layers of trauma and rage. The Berserker armor represents the physical manifestation of Guts' sacrifice. When wearing it, he gains incredible strength and speed but loses all restraint and self-preservation instincts. The armor will literally consume his body to continue fighting, showing how completely he has abandoned normal human limitations. What makes Guts' story unique is that his journey involves slowly reclaiming pieces of his humanity while retaining the power that came from abandoning it. His relationships with Casca, Farnese, and others represent his attempt to find balance between the monster he became and the man he once was. Ken Kaneki's transformation from ordinary college student to ghoul represents both a forced and chosen sacrifice of humanity. While his initial transformation was the result of an accident, his subsequent choices to embrace his ghoul nature show a conscious abandonment of human limitations and morality. Kaneki's sacrifice began when he was forced to consume human flesh to survive. This act required him to fundamentally change his relationship with other humans, but they were no longer just fellow people, but potential food sources. This shift in perspective marked the beginning of his departure from human thinking. As Kaneki embraced his ghoul abilities, he gained incredible regeneration, superhuman strength, and the deadly Kagoon that could slice through almost anything. But these powers came with an insatiable hunger for human flesh and a gradual disconnection from human society. The most significant aspect of Kaneki's transformation was his acceptance of violence as a primary solution to problems. As a human, he was passive and avoided conflict. As a ghoul, he became capable of extreme brutality, often losing himself in bloodlust during battles. Kaneki's various transformations throughout the series, from Eye Patch to Centipede to the One-Eyed King, each represented further departures from his human nature. Each form traded more of his humanity for greater power, culminating in his ability to command other ghouls and reshape ghoul society. What makes Kaneki's story particularly tragic is that his transformations were often driven by his desire to protect others. He sacrificed his humanity not for selfish gain, but because he believed it was necessary to create a world where humans and ghouls could coexist. By the end of his journey, Kaneki had become something far beyond human, a being capable of incredible destruction, but also responsible for the fate of entire species. Dio Brando's sacrifice of humanity is both literal and philosophical, representing a complete rejection of human values in favor of power and domination. His transformation from human to vampire marked the beginning of a century-long quest for ultimate power. Dio's initial sacrifice occurred when he chose to use the stone mask, despite knowing it would fundamentally change what he was. This decision wasn't made out of desperation, but from his belief that humanity itself was weak and that he was destined for something greater. As a vampire, Dio gained immortality, superhuman strength, and various supernatural abilities, including the power to create zombie servants. But more importantly, he gained freedom from human moral constraints. He could now act on his darkest impulses without the limitations of human conscience or empathy. Dio's philosophy explicitly rejected human values. He viewed concepts like mercy, loyalty, and compassion as weaknesses that prevented humans from achieving their full potential. His goal was to transcend humanity entirely and become a perfect being unburdened by human limitations. The acquisition of the world stand represented another level of power that came at the cost of his remaining humanity. His time-stopping abilities made him nearly unstoppable, but also further isolated him from any semblance of human experience. What makes Dio's transformation unique is his evangelical approach to abandoning humanity. He didn't just reject human nature for himself, he actively sought to corrupt others, turning them into vampires or stand users loyal to his vision of transcendence. Dio's century-long influence on the Joestar bloodline shows how completely he had abandoned human concepts of legacy and family. Instead of creating or nurturing, his immortal existence was dedicated to domination and corruption. Muzan Kibutsuji represents the ultimate rejection of humanity in favor of immortality and power. As the original demon, Muzan chose to abandon every aspect of human nature in his quest to become a perfect, immortal being. Muzan's transformation from human to demon was driven by his fear of death due to a terminal illness. When given the chance to become something that could live forever, he embraced the change completely, gaining regenerative abilities, shape-shifting powers, and supernatural strength. The power Muzan gained came with the complete abandonment of human empathy and connection. He became incapable of viewing other beings as anything more than tools or obstacles. His creation of other demons wasn't motivated by companionship, but by his need for servants and his desire to find someone who could conquer the sun. Muzan's sacrifice of humanity extended to his complete rejection of human experiences. He felt no nostalgia for his human life, no regret for the people he killed, and no desire for the connections that define human existence. His only emotions were anger when challenged, and satisfaction when dominating others. What makes Muzan particularly monstrous is his systematic approach to destroying human happiness. He didn't just kill people, he specifically targeted families and communities, turning loved ones into demons to maximize psychological damage. Muzan's 1,000-year existence shows the ultimate consequence of choosing power over humanity. Despite gaining incredible abilities and effective immortality, he became incapable of experiencing any of the joys that make existence meaningful. His final battle reveals the complete emptiness of his existence. Despite all his power, he had become nothing more than a collection of survival instincts and rage, having lost everything that could be considered truly alive. Originally known as the Dwarf in the Flask, represents perhaps the most calculated sacrifice of humanity for power in anime. Unlike others who were human and became something else, Father deliberately removed his human emotions to become a perfect being. Father's transformation involved literally extracting his sins, the human emotions and traits he viewed as weaknesses. By removing pride, wrath, lust, envy, greed, gluttony, and sloth from himself, he believed he could transcend human limitations and achieve godhood. The power Father gained through this process was immense. He could perform alchemy without circles, manipulate matter at a fundamental level, and eventually absorb truth itself. His abilities placed him far beyond any normal alchemist or homunculus. But Father's sacrifice was more than just emotional, it was philosophical. By removing his human traits, he lost the capacity for growth, creativity, and genuine understanding. His pursuit of knowledge became mechanical, rather than driven by curiosity or wonder. Father's creation of the homunculi from his extracted emotions shows how completely he had rejected human nature. These beings represented everything he had cast aside: passion, anger, desire, while he remained as a cold, calculating intellect focused solely on his goal. The irony of Father's transformation is that his pursuit of perfection made him fundamentally inferior to the humans he sought to transcend. His inability to understand human bonds, determination, and sacrifice ultimately led to his defeat. Father's final moments reveal the emptiness of his achievement. Despite gaining godlike power, he had become incapable of understanding the very forces that gave life meaning, making his existence ultimately hollow. Makima represents a unique form of sacrificing humanity, yet her pursuit of power still required her to systematically destroy any capacity for genuine human connection she might have developed. As the control devil, Makima possessed the ability to dominate others completely, bending them to her will through various means. This power was so fundamental to her nature that she seemed incapable of forming relationships that weren't based on control and manipulation. Makima's sacrifice of humanity was ongoing rather than a single transformative moment. Every relationship she formed was corrupted by her need to control others. She was incapable of viewing people as equals, instead seeing them as dogs to be trained or tools to be used. The power Makima wielded extended beyond simple mind control. She could force contracts, manipulate memories, and even control the fundamental nature of devils. Her abilities made her one of the most feared beings in her world, but also completely isolated her from genuine human experience. What makes Makima's character particularly tragic is her obsession with Chainsaw Man, a being she couldn't fully control. This obsession represented perhaps the closest thing to genuine emotion she was capable of, but even this was fundamentally possessive rather than loving. Makima's approach to achieving her goals required the systematic manipulation and sacrifice of everyone around her. She viewed human suffering as acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of her vision of a better world, showing complete disconnection from human empathy. Her ultimate fate, being killed and consumed by Denji, represents the consequence of completely abandoning human connection. Despite all her power, she was ultimately defeated by someone who chose to maintain his humanity rather than sacrifice it for strength. Beautiful imperfection. In the end, the characters who maintained their humanity while gaining power were often the ones who achieved the most meaningful victories. Power without humanity is ultimately empty, a lesson written in the tragic fates of these 12 characters who chose strength over soul.